The national economic security of the United States depends on the reliable functioning of critical infrastructure. As cybersecurity threats have become more prevalent in recent years, the nation's economy, public safety and health, and security have become increasingly at risk of extortion. To address these growing national threats, the President issued Executive Order 13636. The executive order called for the development of a voluntary, risk-based cybersecurity framework. The framework is a set of industry standards and best practices to help organizations manage cybersecurity risks. It focuses on using business drivers to guide cybersecurity activities and considering cybersecurity risks as part of the organization's risk management practices. In this video, we will help you understand the purpose of the NIST Cyber Framework, what makes up the framework, and why it is useful for every entity to use. The framework enables organizations, regardless of size, degree of cybersecurity risk, or cybersecurity sophistication, to apply the principles and best practices of risk management to improve the security and resilience of critical infrastructure. It provides organization and structure to today's multiple approaches to cybersecurity by assembling standards, guidelines, and practices that are working efficiently in industry today. The framework is not a one-size-fits-all approach, though. Each organization will have unique threats, vulnerabilities, and risk tolerances, and how they implement the framework will vary. Ultimately, the framework is aimed at reducing and better managing cybersecurity risks.
The NIST Cybersecurity Framework is made up of three components. First, the framework core. Think of this as the glossary which directs a user to the information needed to resolve different problems based on their types. Second are the implementation tiers. We can think of tiers as the degree of involvement a company takes regarding cybersecurity. Some organizations may value it less than others, which means they won't need or want as many security measures. Third, the framework profile serves to give organizations a goal to attain regarding their security standards. Picture this scenario. You're sitting at your desk minding your own business. Suddenly, your boss arrives holding an enormous pile of tasks that need to be completed. This amount of work is insurmountable. You can't begin to tell where the tasks begin and where they end. You wouldn't try to navigate around a foreign location without any instructions or references, so why try to solve workplace challenges any differently? The framework core is the map that helps you navigate around these cybersecurity challenges, starting from broad functions down to informative references. I'm glad I made it home. You may be asking yourself, there has to be more to this core than a ratty map, and you're right. There are four elements that when combined give you a framework core. The four elements are as follows: functions, categories, subcategories, and finally informative references. We'll begin our detailed framework discussion with the functions element. The functions element is made up of 5 cybersecurity activities, whose purpose is to reach certain cybersecurity outcomes. All of the functions can and should be done simultaneously in order to create an operational culture that addresses cybersecurity risk. Identify strives to develop an organizational understanding to manage cybersecurity risk to systems, assets, data, and capabilities. Examples of these categories include the following: asset management, business environment, and more. Protect's purpose is to create and implement appropriate safeguards to ensure delivery of critical infrastructure services. The Protect function should allow an organization to limit or contain the impact of any potential cybersecurity threat. Some examples that would go under Protect can include access control, awareness and training, and data security. Detect allows organizations to create and implement procedures that help identify the occurrence of a cybersecurity event. The goal of Detect is to have the correct training and processes in place in order to detect a cybersecurity event as quickly as possible. This is Respond. His purpose is to contain the impact of a detected cybersecurity event. Having a response to hurtful events can be the difference between recovering and a breach propagating throughout an organization. In other words, Respond empowers organizations to take action against cybersecurity events instead of allowing the problem to persist indefinitely. Some examples that would go under Respond includes response planning and communications or analysis. The Recover function attempts to restore operations back to their normal state. Recovery needs to be implemented as quickly as possible in order to reduce an event's impact. Few minutes of downtime can lead to millions of dollars in losses. Proper training and planning will save members within the organization the stress from having to deal with monumental headaches so they can in turn focus on other activities. Some examples of recovery activities include recovery planning, improvements, and communication. What about the other core elements? The rest of the core elements continue to subdivide the 5 functions into more focused activities, eventually reaching references which will help an organization adhere to cross-sector standards, guidelines, and practices. Categories breaks down functions into groups relating to specific activities. Examples of categories can include asset management, access control, or detection processes. Subcategories are categories just further broken down. We are now left with specific managerial or technical activities that can be completed by various workers. An example of such an activity could include firewall settings have been updated. The final piece of the 4 core framework elements is informative references. As stated earlier, informative references contain various pieces of cross-sector standards, guidelines, and practices. These citations should be used to orient the organization. The information filled in this section should be the references first used when developing your organization-specific framework.
The next part of the NIST framework is the implementation tiers. The tiers provide context on how an organization views cybersecurity risks and the degree to which an organization's current practices exhibit the characteristics defined within the framework. These tiers reflect a progression from informal reactive responses to approaches that are agile and risk-informed. During the tier selection process, an organization should consider its current risk management practices, the threat environment, legal and regulatory requirements, business and mission objectives, and organizational constraints. Finally, the last part of the framework is the profile. Through use of the profiles, the framework will help the organization align its cybersecurity activities with its business requirements, risk tolerances, and resources. The profile represents the outcomes based on business needs that an organization has selected from the framework categories and subcategories. The profile can be characterized as the alignment of standards, guidelines, and practices to the framework core in a particular implementation scenario. Profiles can be used to identify opportunities for improving cybersecurity posture by comparing a current profile, the as-is state, with a target profile, the to-be state. To develop a profile, an organization can review the categories and subcategories and determine which are most important to their organization's unique needs.
In conclusion, the NIST framework is a practical and very useful tool that every organization should use to best mitigate cybersecurity risks. The framework provides organization and structure to today's multiple approaches to cybersecurity by assembling standards, guidelines, and practices that are working effectively in industry today. Moreover, because it references globally recognized standards for cybersecurity, the framework can also be used by organizations located outside the United States and can serve as a model for international cooperation on strengthening critical infrastructure cybersecurity.
The framework is a living document and will continue to be updated and improved as industry provides feedback on implementation. As the framework is put into practice, lessons learned will be integrated into future versions. This will ensure it is meeting the needs of critical infrastructure owners and operators in a dynamic and challenging environment of new threats, risks, and solutions. Use of this voluntary framework is the next step to improve the cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure, providing guidance for individual organizations while increasing the cybersecurity posture of the nation's critical infrastructure as a whole.